Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Schwartz from Benchling. We're a cloud software company that provides laboratory informatics solutions for life sciences R&D. Thanks so much for joining in, and thank you to the conference organizers for having us. Today, I wanted to focus in on how digital systems are evolving to handle the next generation of scientific breakthroughs. Certainly, we want to leverage technologies at the leading edge like machine learning and predictive intelligence, but we also have to rethink core functions like lab operations and data structure in light of newer scientific modalities. So I wanted to lead in by sharing some perspective on what we see life science companies doing to start preparing their digital infrastructures to leverage these new approaches. At Benchling, we've supported close to 400 life science companies in their digital informatics transformations. And the themes that come up most often are the complexity of the science and the need to constantly adapt. So let's start by recapping how our industry has shifted. If you look back to the early part of this millennium, the best selling drug had tens of millions of users and targeted a single indication, hypercholesterolemia. The first oncology drug with a targeted biomarker had just begun to hit the market. And if you fast forward to today, many of the top drugs have anywhere between 5 to 10 different indications, essentially using the same mechanism of action to treat disparate disease. There are over 1,000 oncology drugs in development, and 73% of them have an associated biomarker. 8 of the top 10 drugs now are biologics, and we've seen the first 2 CAR T cell therapies introduced into the market. And what's in the pipeline is even more promising. There are newer modalities like antibody drug conjugates and bispecifics, cell and gene therapies that all have the potential to improve efficacy and move towards curative intent. So medicine is getting more precise and more powerful, but it's also getting more complex. These new modalities across biologics and adaptive cell engineering have far more complex structures and processes used to both develop them and to manufacture them. So we've seen the industry shift to a new model to support the next generation of therapeutic development. We've seen our customers align their efforts into discovery platforms. So it's not just focused on a single product, but instead they focus on a distinct pathway or technology capable of producing multiple therapies across multiple indications. As the science becomes more complex, we're seeing teams become much more specialized to increase the depth and efficiency that they can bring to each step in the R&D process. And each of these teams is producing not just more data, but more complex data. So there are more contextualizations that need to be maintained as we move downstream in the process and across programs. And there are now more streams of data, including things like lab automation and manufacturing sensors. So the industry is looking towards digital solutions here to not just manage the volumes of data, but to bring order and structure to it. Before we can rely heavily on data automation technologies, we have to make sure our digital infrastructure is ready to handle this. These are the areas that we focus on with our customers, and this also guides our own product design philosophy. The most important thing is getting the balance right between using tailored solutions for the science that your companies are pursuing, but also maintaining the capability to evolve and iterate. And I'll share some examples of this in a moment. If this is done right, your digital solutions can perpetually provide a platform for scientific decision support. And this, we feel, is the ultimately the biggest lever on hitting milestones faster. And something that might be easy to overlook here is the end user experience. Data scientists and app developers will always have their tools of choice, but scientists need a user experience and interface that reflects their operational workflows and saves them time, or they simply won't adopt them, and then the data won't be there when you need it. So what does it mean to be built for complex science? There has to be alignment between experimental workflow and the way that the underlying biological and chemical entities are modeled. As an example, we happen to support a lot of customers who are working on the next generation of adaptive cellular therapies. And there's many different approaches here, from CAR T and T cell receptors to natural killer cells and tumor infiltrating lymphocytes. The science here generally involves the iteration of many different variable regions of a CAR construct. combined with in vitro and in vivo evaluation and optimization. And while this is a very simplified view of the process, it's actually very complex to model this. Every fragment of the constructs used has their own sequence and properties and ontology. Every resulting CAR-T then has experimental results in vitro and in vivo that need to be tied back to the drug candidate and its underlying parts and sequences. So this is clearly a data modeling challenge, but it's also an operational challenge, since these also represent the day-to-day functions for lab scientists who are developing these therapies. And so when we think of preparing digital infrastructure for these kinds of challenges, we have to think about both the data management and structure, as well as the operational considerations. The way that we think about this is to build applications that follow the operational workflows, from in silico design to experimental execution, but also to make sure that the data capture flows into a structured data model. This means that at any point in the process, you should be able to trace your work back to all the preceding steps and underlying sequences. And more importantly, for scientific decision support, the data can be readily queried across any dimension of the data model. This is a necessity to start building in automation and machine learning routines. And so that's an example of how a very complex scientific process can be structured into a digital solution. But the hallmark of any good program is that the science will evolve over time. So let's think about what happens when things change. Digital solutions have to be adaptable. The IT world has largely moved away from monolithic software and towards more agile approaches. But being adaptable shouldn't always have to mean coding and application development. Many life science companies either don't have the resources to do this, or they simply want to use resources they have to focus on higher value operations. This here is an illustrative example of a protein purification process, and it reflects the constant iteration and evolution that these specialized teams see on a daily basis. So in an ideal world, the data model, the process, and the workflows should all be configurable in a low or no code environment so that companies can iterate and evolve quickly without being resource intensive or overly dependent on their digital partners. One way that we seek to achieve this is with a configurable data model that is editable right from an admin panel. So users can adjust the relationships and the metadata on any particular entity quickly and without code. This also applies to process workflows, where you can update iterative processes like the example you see here. So adaptability can apply to data modeling and process, but it also can apply at the institutional level. And we've seen this recently with the global pandemic. One of our customers, Corteva, is a large global agricultural biotechnology company. And while their primary business focus is on seeds and crop protection, they saw that their customers and communities were being severely impacted by COVID. So they quickly pivoted focus to be able to offer COVID testing services using their genetic screening capabilities, and could adapt their digital solutions in a relatively short time frame. They're now testing hundreds of thousands of samples in their local communities, and we're all very appreciative of the work that they're doing. But whether you're testing patient samples or cell line samples, ultimately the goal of any informatics solution is to drive better scientific decision support. Scientific decision support is the highest leverage step in reaching milestones faster. Nothing beats making the right decision at the right time. But what most often gets in the way of a good decision-making process is having the necessary data fragmented across multiple systems. Many companies operate with a multitude of data sources, both structured and unstructured, and collect these in various end-user applications. So when it comes time to make important decisions, there's usually a lot of time spent trying to pull this data together so that it's easily viewed and understood. But what often happens is the data is analyzed in isolation to a particular team or a specific dimension of the data. And it's very difficult to look holistically across the entire function or process. And bringing in historical data is also a big challenge, and in most cases, a missed opportunity to better inform decision-making. Scientific decision support has to start with a solid base of scientific knowledge, and this data has to be threaded together and accessible to those involved in the process. This is a depiction of the decision analysis process that I thought did a nice job of reflecting how real world decisions are made. There are certainly facts and clear evidence that materialize, but there is always uncertainty, and sometimes strong opinions can either be informed by historical data or not. And so decisions are not always purely scientific. Oftentimes, a team or a company's operational goals and objectives carry weight in the ultimate decision. So it goes without saying that there are a multitude of data sources that need to be readily accessible for accelerated decision support. A key attribute in the evolution of digital systems is the ability to house data across these many different dimensions, all in the same data layer. So whether the data initially comes from entries in an electronic lab notebook, or an instrument integration, or some other integrated software system, they can all reside in the same foundational data layer and be inherently queryable for decision support. This makes it possible to analyze the scientific aspect of the data, so the biology, the functional performance of an assay, QA and QC metrics, but also from within the same system, you can assess the operational aspects of the process. How many assays are being run through the team? How long each one is taking, all the way right down to the individual performance of team members. And this is what we believe enables faster and more efficient scientific decision support. Of course, though, the digital informatics systems are only as good as the data that flows into them. R&D teams have often struggled with user adoption of new systems, and it's not always easy or possible to drive top-down strategies in this part of the industry. So the best thing to focus on is creating applications that users will actually want to use. And there are two main aspects of this. First, the user experience has to be simple, intuitive, modern, and collaborative. This is now the expectation for the new generation of R&D scientists. They have to be able to quickly search and access data like they would run a Google search. And they have to be able to share data with their colleagues with the same ease as tagging a friend in a social post. And second, it has to be a lever for productivity. Scientists in our industry spend way too much time performing manual data entry and repetitive tasks, the same way that doctors spend too much time entering records into electronic health records, or clinical research associates spend too much time capturing data in their CTMS. It's a common occurrence that needs to be addressed with things like reusable templates, instrument integrations, computed fields. These are the kinds of time savers that will make the tool indispensable. And the return on this investment is not just increased productivity, but higher quality data as a result. So hopefully that provides some perspective on how to think about evolving your digital infrastructure. If you'd like to learn more about the range of enterprise lab informatics solutions that Benchling provides, please feel free to reach out. We'd encourage you to visit our virtual booth to speak with a product specialist, and you can certainly feel free to contact me directly anytime. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and thanks for your time.